Hello and welcome to the video. In this video we're going to take a look at this model here. This is the HobbyKing Nino, which is an EPP kit, one of the Glue and Go series, and HobbyKing are bringing out a couple of these at the moment, which I'm very interested in, purely because I'm still looking for that perfect trainer plane for younger pilots who want to get into flying fixed wing that you can fly without the fear of too much damage. Now, we've looked at a couple of planes already. The Tough Trainer 2 was a fantastic plane, really like that. I've actually given that to one of my friends. He's currently flying that and learning to get to grips with it. The challenge with that is that it's got a prop at the front, which does mean that if you do crash and you have a nasty nose front landing, then it will snap the prop. We also looked at the EPP Shark because I was interested in that because the layout of the Shark was similar to things like the Skywalkers and the Bixlers, where the prop is up at the back. Now that does mean that if you do come into land, then you're not going to snap the prop. There's nothing to hit the ground at all that's going to get damaged. Challenge with that, unfortunately, it didn't have ailerons. So this little guy that we're about to build here hopefully does. Now, the way it comes in the box is just the basic parts. You're going to have to add all of the different pieces yourself. So when you open the box up, what you're looking at is lots and lots of EPP foam. It's already coloured, all of the hinges are already there, all of the balsa wood pieces and carbon fibre rods are in here too, along with the manual. Build time for this thing is a couple of hours. That's not allowing for the glue drying time. The manual itself is pretty good and does go through all the steps and how you got to put it together, but this isn't something that I'd recommend for a very first time builder, or if you're a parent and want to build this with your child, I'd recommend that you at least build one or two other models first. The reason being is that some of the images aren't particularly clear in the manual, especially when you're talking about where certain things fit in. There are carbon spars and reinforcing rods for both the horizontal, the wing and the tail, and also the vertical elements as well that are like a clamshell, look like a big Pac-Man here, that go over the wing and tail assembly when you've got that all stuck together. To build this thing, you're going to have to supply your own electronics as well. So the first thing you're going to need are 4 servos. I'm just using standard 9-gram servos. I'll put links to all of these components underneath if you want to buy them. A lot of the stuff for the EPP Glue and Go kits actually has underneath all the recommended motors, props and whatnot, but I'll link to what I've used here, or as similar as I can get it. I've used 30 amp ESC, and I was going to use these motors. Now these motors are actually multi-star motors. They're very nice. These are 2206 2150s, and I was going to put them on here and fly with it, but actually they're so nice, I'm very tempted to actually put them to one side and use them on a quadcopter. So what I'm going to use similar motors. I'm going to use a 2205 2300 motor with a tri-bladed prop. You'll need a receiver. There is a Y cable in the kit, so you're going to need to be able to have 2 outputs for the ailerons within your receiver, or you're going to have to provide your own Y lead to connect the ailerons together. I think that would have been nice to have that Y lead in the kit. And you're going to need a battery as well. Now the battery I'm using is this one of these Bolt V2s, one of the high voltage LiPo batteries. This is a 1300 milliamp hour pack and provides perfect centre of gravity. Now building it is pretty straightforward. You just follow each of the instructions. They're nice colour images, but do take your time and test fit. A couple of tips here. The carbon rods are not all the same length. There are little cuts and recesses all throughout the model to accept all this carbon reinforcement, and do make sure that you've test fit everything first, because what I did unfortunately was I didn't spot that one of the carbon rods was slightly longer than the others, so I ended up putting a shorter rod in that slot and gluing it up, and then finding that I had to Dremel off the end of the longer rod. So just be aware of that and make sure that you're taking your time. And while we're on the subject of glue, it talks about several glues in the manual as well. And although you can build this thing with hot glue, and in fact I did, you have to be very quick and make sure that you're pulling open whatever you're putting the hot glue in and keeping it open until you've pushed the spar inside, and then using pressure to set the hot glue around the spar. Because the surface of the carbon fibre is very smooth, hot glue isn't a particularly great choice. I'd recommend following the advice in the manual here for how you put all of these things together. The other thing I'll point out is the motors that we were going to use, both the original multi-star Turnigy ones and this older quad one that I'm using here. The model itself is designed for a much larger motor to fit in this space. With the motors that I've got here, I found that I had to design a 3D part. I'll put a link in the description if you've got a 3D printer. It means that it'll slide into position. It actually grabs the corner of all of the foam around the motor mount, and it also helps keep everything true. And that is actually another reason why using a glue other than hot glue is quite good, because you do want to make sure that everything is exactly at right angles on this thing as you put it together, because if it's a little bit skew with, it's not going to fly very well. It talks about using a set square in the manual. I find a nice chunky hardback book. My Tales of Narnia is the one I'm using here. Is perfect for not only checking your right angles, but also for keeping things level and solid. And the little trick in the manual of kind of putting it against the edge of a table while it dries and sets up is a very handy one. To fly, it's very easy. The centre of gravity with all those pieces and the battery installed just under the nose means that the central gravity is actually in line with the prop, and to launch it's very straightforward. You can just hold it by the top, apply power, and it almost flies up out of your hand on its own with very little time and effort. With a very small prop that I'm using here, the prop gap itself is really designed for a much larger prop, but the setup I'm using here gives lots of thrust and does keep the prop nice and compact away from little fingers. I dialed back the throws on my radio quite a lot here. I'm flying at about 60–70% throws, and this thing is quite handy. The video that here is shot on a reasonably windy day, and it doesn't really care. It's kind of floating around, and it's really good fun to fly. It does actually look really good. And although I originally got this as an idea for the younger pilots who are learning to fly, I actually know a couple of older pilots that would probably get a kick out of this as well. So in summary, what do I think? It's a nice model to build, and so long as you've gone through a couple of builds before, you'll be able to follow the instructions and put this thing together. There's not a massive amount of pieces, but you do have to make sure that as you're putting it all together, you're taking your time and making sure that everything is pushed fully home, and that you've also got all the carbon fibre rods in the right places. There are a couple of guide rods for the servos in the back. I struggled to get those in exactly the right position, these little balsa spars. I ended up hot gluing them into little slots that I ended up cutting into the foam with a knife myself, but they work absolutely fine. It is handy as a little trainer plane because it does have ailerons, rudder, and it also has the elevator too. So although it looks like a very fun thing, and in fact my wife was commenting as we were out in the field, because it's actually my wife who was doing this video, so thank you to her for that. She commented on how funky it looks and how it looked like it shouldn't fly, but it's actually a very aerodynamic shape and very much like a lot of the smaller foamies that some of you will have already flown. And that leads me to the only thing you have to be a little bit careful with about this, is that because the foam above and below is particularly deep, because it has to look like a fish, it is a little bit delicate, and on about the fourth or fifth landing it was a little bit heavier than the others. It did completely snap the front out of the model, especially because that is where the battery is connected to, so that weight and inertia kind of pulled the foam apart in that trickier landing. 10 minutes later and a bit of hot glue is all back together, and I reinforced the nose and it was flying great. But one of the things that you might want to do if you're going to use this as a trainer plane is maybe consider getting hold of some additional foam pieces and strengthening up this bottom leading edge of this fish so that when it does come down you don't have the same kind of problem. So for me, this is one that I've flown a couple of times actually, and because of its size, it's easily going to fit and fly well inside a park. In particularly windy weather, it is going to catch the wind a little bit with these large surfaces, but it's just like a lot of other fun foam planes that are out there. But of course, this one looks like a clownfish. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video, and particularly for watching right to the very end. We try and release a video on Tuesday and Friday, and sometimes we'll release 1 or 2 extra ones in a week as well. All of the videos on the channel are organised into easy to use playlists, so do have a look in there, because if you're interested in a subject, we organise all the videos on that subject so you can find them easily all together in one place. If you like what we're doing, then please like and subscribe and tell others about the channel so they can come and join as well. We're available in all of the usual social media places, particularly in places like Instagram, Twitter, and we also share all of our 3D designs on Thingiverse.